Romy lived on the 6th floor of a residential building named Neptunus, located at Heldenplein in Knokke-Heist, Belgium. One afternoon, after lunch outside, she returned to her apartment with her children. They stepped into the lift, rode it up to the 6th floor, and walked out into the hallway. But what they saw near the stairwell, just steps from the elevator, was something straight out of a horror film. Hello, true crime viewers. Today, we're revisiting a case from Belgium, one that remains shrouded in mystery even as new leads emerge. Over the years, theories have swirled, suspects have come and gone, and questions have lingered. But with advancements in forensic science and renewed efforts by law enforcement, there's hope that the truth may finally come to light. Ingrid Caeckaert. Born on May 7, 1964, in Maldegem, Belgium, she was the only child of George Caeckaert and Marie-Joseph Farik, a couple who ran a bakery in their small village. Ingrid spent most of her time living with her parents, but occasionally stayed overnight with her boyfriend at an apartment in Knokke-Heist, a quiet coastal village in West Flanders. Ingrid wasn't just a baker's daughter. She was a confident, self-made businesswoman, carving out her own path in a world that often underestimated her. She owned and ran her own real estate agency, Agents Atlanta, located in Knokke-Heist. The business was thriving, a testament to Ingrid's drive and ambition. Described as attractive and always impeccably dressed, she lived a quiet, steady life with her boyfriend. But as the only child, Ingrid carried a deep sense of responsibility toward her parents. She hated being away from them for too long, knowing how lonely and depressed they felt without her. On March 16, 1991, Ingrid briefly stopped by a clothing store run by a close friend. Her friend later recalled that Ingrid seemed to be in high spirits, mentioning she was in a hurry for lunch and had a meeting scheduled. "I'll be back soon," Ingrid assured her, before heading to a nearby bakery to pick up a sandwich. Instead of returning to her parents' home for lunch, as she usually did, Ingrid decided to eat at her boyfriend's apartment. She had a meeting with a client in the area and didn't want to wander too far. At around 1 p.m., Ingrid arrived at the apartment building. Just minutes later, another resident, Romy, returned to the building with her children after having lunch at a nearby restaurant. They stepped into the elevator, rode it up to the 6th floor. But as the elevator doors opened, Romy froze. The elevator was positioned directly in front of the stairwell leading to the 7th floor, and there, sprawled on the stairs, was the lifeless, bloody body of Ingrid Caeckaert. Romy stood frozen, her instincts screaming that someone had just fled up to the 7th floor through the stairwell as the elevator doors opened. Though she saw no one, feeling danger, not willing to take any chances, and gripped by panic, she shielded her children's eyes from the horrific scene. Quickly, she stepped back into the elevator, descended to the ground floor, and rushed outside in a frenzy. In the same panic mode, she found a phone booth and called her husband to inform the horrific incident she witnessed. "Call the police," he urged. When the police arrived, they were met with a scene of sheer brutality. Blood was everywhere, a grim testament to the violence that had unfolded. Ingrid had sustained over 62 stab wounds, each one painting a picture of a frenzied, merciless attack. The defensive wounds on her hands and arms told another story, one of fierce resistance. Ingrid had fought back hard. Based on the blood spatter patterns, it appeared the attack began on the stairwell, a confined space where escape would have been nearly impossible. Luckily, the killer hadn't walked away unharmed. During the attack, he had injured himself, leaving behind a trail of his own blood. A bloodied handprint marked the glass door leading to the apartment, and outside, a 170-meter trail of blood stretched along the street and sidewalk. Blood was also discovered on the 7th floor and the stairwell between the 7th and 8th floors. It seemed the killer had heard the elevator doors opening when Romy and her children arrived at the 6th floor, and in a desperate bid to avoid being seen, he fled upstairs. Outside, the blood trail came to an abrupt end. Investigators concluded that the killer likely got into a car, vanishing before the police could arrive. The police then caught what they believed to be their second lucky break. The apartment building was in a bustling, highly populated area, and on that particular day, a long line had formed outside the nearby ATM. In fact, the line was still there when officers arrived. The ATM, positioned right next to the apartment, had drawn a crowd, and police immediately began questioning those waiting in line. Only one person reported seeing anything unusual: a single blood stain on the sidewalk. The police moved quickly to the spot where the blood trail had abruptly ended, questioning nearby witnesses about anything suspicious they might have seen. Several people recalled a small red car poorly parked on the sidewalk around that time. One witness even narrowed it down to a specific make and model: a red Honda Civic. Investigators scoured records of all red Honda Civic owners in Belgium's West Flanders region, but the search yielded no leads. Adding to the mystery, nothing had been stolen from Ingrid, nor was anything taken from her apartment. There were also no signs of sexual assault. Yet, the sheer brutality of the attack left investigators convinced that Ingrid likely knew her killer, and not just in passing. This was personal. With this in mind, the police naturally turned their attention to Ingrid's boyfriend, the person she had gone to see that day. But their suspicions didn't last long. Multiple neighbors confirmed he had been inside his apartment the entire time, and the blood trail leading outside the building effectively ruled him out as a suspect. He was understandably devastated, grief-stricken to learn that Ingrid had been viciously murdered just feet from his home, without him even realizing it. With the most obvious suspect cleared, investigators shifted their focus to Ingrid's final weeks, searching for clues that might explain who could have wanted her dead. One incident stood out. On February 14, 1991, Ingrid received a Valentine's card from an anonymous sender while at home. She knew it wasn't from her boyfriend, but seemed to recognize the sender nonetheless. After reading it, she reportedly tore the card to shreds, visibly irritated. Her mother witnessed the entire episode and later recounted the story to police. This, however, wouldn't be the last Ingrid heard from the mysterious sender. On March 2nd, Ingrid opened the trunk of her car, only to find a note left behind by someone. It was an anonymous letter, filled with declarations of love. Just 1 week later, on March 9th, another mysterious gesture arrived. This time, a bouquet of purple carnations was delivered to her real estate agency. The choice of flowers was peculiar, to say the least. Years later, Ingrid's mother would reveal a telling detail about her daughter. Ingrid hated carnations, and she didn't think purple was a nice color. She always said you only give that to dead people. On March 13th, Ingrid was staying with her boyfriend when the doorbell to his apartment suddenly rang. Moments later, a knock followed. Neither of them was expecting visitors, so her boyfriend got up and used the intercom to ask who was there. Silence. No reply. Whoever it was, they left shortly after. Sadly, no one else seemed to know much about Ingrid's stalker, if anything at all. There was no description, no likeness, no information to share with the public. None of her boyfriend's neighbors recalled seeing the person who rang the doorbell, and none of the local florists remembered filling an order for a bouquet of purple carnations. With few leads left, the police turned to the killer's blood, collected from the crime scene. They ran the DNA through the relatively new databases available at the time, hoping for a match. By the end of March, the results came back, no hits. The DNA didn't match anyone on file, including Ingrid's boyfriend. On March 30th, the local police received an unexpected package in the mail, an anonymous letter written in block letters. Its contents were alarming and potentially enlightening. The letter read, "I killed Ingrid Caeckaert out of love, pour la passion. I knew her very well." While the message itself didn't narrow down the suspect pool, the way it was written did. Ingrid had been murdered in the Flemish region of Belgium, and the police investigating her case were Flemish. Flemish, a dialect of Dutch, is spoken in Belgium and the Netherlands. Ingrid's friends and family were also Flemish, but the letter, intriguingly, was written in French. This raised a critical question. Was the killer Walloon? Walloon, closely related to French, is spoken in the Wallonian half of Belgium. Of course, there was also the possibility the killer was a foreigner, or that the letter itself was a hoax. The police decided to take the letter public, displaying it on the TV channel VTM and asking anyone who recognized the handwriting to come forward. At the same time, they attempted to extract DNA from the saliva used on the letter's stamp. If successful, they could compare it to the blood left at the crime scene. Unfortunately, both efforts fell short. The handwriting didn't lead to any breakthroughs, and the DNA from the stamp couldn't be matched. With no new leads, the investigation stalled, and the trail went cold. Ingrid's body was returned to her hometown of Maldegem, where she was laid to rest. But even in death, she wasn't left in peace. In April, without anyone noticing, someone visited her grave and left 3 flowers. The pattern repeated in 1993 and again in 1996, each time with the same arrangement: 2 roses and 1 purple carnation, the same flower that had been anonymously sent to her workplace. Then, just as mysteriously as it began, the visit stopped. Whoever it was, they never returned. In the years that followed, the police turned their attention to 2 potential suspects: a homeless man from Ghent and a man from Schaerbeek. Both had been near Knokke-Heist around the time of the murder, and both had a history of sex crimes. But after further investigation, neither was linked to Ingrid's death. The police even exhumed the grave of a man in Waarschuit, another suspect tied to multiple crimes during that period. They extracted his DNA, but it didn't match the killer's. Toward the end of 1997, the police made another public appeal, and this time, someone came forward. The witness recalled seeing a bloodied man near the apartment building on the day of the murder. Based on his description, a composite sketch was created and distributed among locals. Sadly, no one recognized the man in the sketch, and with 6 years having passed, questions arose about the reliability of the witness's memory. In November 2002, the police issued yet another appeal, this time resharing the anonymous letters with the public. They also stated their belief that the killer was likely a secret admirer, someone consumed by rage after being rejected. To quote the police chief directly, "Given the frenzy with which the murder was committed, we assume that Caeckaert was the victim of a rejected admirer. She had a steady boyfriend and led a quiet life. But she was a beautiful young blonde woman. Our working hypothesis is that she was murdered by a man who saw more in her than she saw in him." In 2010, a breakthrough in another case briefly reignited hope. A serial sex offender and killer named Ronald Elaine Jansen was arrested. He had essayed and murdered 3 young women, aged 18 to 22, and police were willing to explore any lead. They compared the DNA from Ingrid's case to Ronald's, wondering if she might have been one of his victims, but once again, there was no match. On March 1, 2012, the police made one final public appeal, this time showcasing the anonymous letter found in the trunk of Ingrid's car 2 weeks before her murder. They also revisited the Valentine's card she had received, hoping to trace its origins. According to their investigation, the man was around 30 years old at the time and came from Antwerp. He worked in a pharmacy, was married, and had 2 children. He either rented or owned an apartment in the Albertfirth residence, close to Heldenplein. He must have been a regular customer at the Brasserie Royal. Shortly after, the police finally tracked him down. By all accounts, the case seemed closed. Logic, reason, and circumstantial evidence pointed to him as the likely killer. His handwriting matched the Valentine's card, and his behavior suggested he had been stalking Ingrid. But there was one problem: his alibi. At the time of Ingrid's murder, he was on a ship sailing toward Canada. Records, documents, and the memories of fellow passengers all confirmed his whereabouts. His alibi was airtight, one of the most solid the police had ever seen. It became clear he had nothing to do with the crime. Ingrid's parents, who had followed the investigation closely, seemed to believe in his innocence as well. In an interview, they admitted they were still clueless about who the killer could have been. Most importantly, the DNA of killer doesn't match with him. But the police uncovered a new piece of information, one that suggested someone might have made an earlier attempt on Ingrid's life. On December 14, 1989, Ingrid was admitted to a hospital with a deep stab wound in her thigh. She sustained the injury during a cooking lesson at the Hotel and Tourism School Spermely in Bruges. Her explanation? She claimed she had accidentally sat on a chef's knife left on the driver's seat of her car. Many found this explanation, to put it mildly, far-fetched. On March 20, 2014, the Belgian Federal Police uploaded a video to their YouTube channel. In it, they made yet another appeal to the public, but this time they had a new lead to share. Back in 2012, following that year's appeal, a woman came forward with a story. She told police she had once been friends with a Frenchman, a tour guide who worked in the south of France for local bus companies. According to her, sometime between 2000 and 2005, the man's tour bus had stopped at a bar. There, a woman from his latest tour group was sitting alone, crying. He asked her what was wrong, and her response was nothing short of shocking. She confessed that she had been carrying a terrible secret for years. And what was that secret? Her brother had murdered someone in Knokke-Heist many years earlier, a crime she had kept hidden because she feared her elderly parents wouldn't survive the truth if it ever came out. The witness never forgot the story, but she didn't know who to tell or how to connect it to a specific case. It wasn't until 2012, when she first learned about Ingrid's murder, that everything clicked. After watching the police's public appeal, she realized the pieces of the puzzle finally fit. The witness provided the police with the tour guide's name and detailed information about him. He was the person investigators most wanted to question, but sadly, that was no longer possible. He had passed away in 2005. With that door closed, the police turned to the next best option. Their latest appeal targeted anyone who had ridden on a tour bus in southern France between 2000 and 2005. By 2014, the police had questioned over 2,000 people in connection to Ingrid's case. But despite the sheer volume of interviews, the killer remained elusive. Up until then, DNA analysis in Belgium had primarily focused on direct matches, comparing DNA from crime scenes to profiles in existing databases of convicted criminals or specific suspects. But a breakthrough came when Sophie Claerhout, a researcher and author specializing in forensic engineering, approached the Caeckaert family. Together with Ingrid's parents, she pushed for a significant update to Belgium's DNA laws, inspired by the approach used in the US to catch the infamous Golden State Killer. The proposed change? Familial searching. This method allows investigators to look for partial DNA matches in databases, identifying individuals who might be close relatives of the unknown perpetrator, such as parents, children, siblings, or even cousins. A partial match, indicating at least 50% shared DNA, could provide a crucial lead by pinpointing a family from which the perpetrator might come. While it doesn't directly identify the killer, it narrows the suspect pool dramatically, enabling investigators to build family trees and focus their efforts. In November 2022, over 750 men volunteered their DNA after a new technique for examining DNA, with a specific focus on the male Y chromosome, was made public. By August 2, 2024, the pool had been narrowed down further, with DNA samples taken from 150 men. Some had volunteered back in 2022, others had submitted their DNA as far back as 1991. And were now having their samples tested with 33 years' worth of advancements. The rest were summoned from across Belgium by the Ghent Public Prosecutor's Office. The police also turned to phenotyping, a method that studies genes to predict observable characteristics like physical appearance, development, and behavior of a person. According to the results, the killer was likely a Western European man, around 40 years old at the time of the murder. If still alive, he would now be in his 70s. While the police have yet to publicly name any persons of interest or charge suspects, Ingrid's parents have said this is the most optimistic they've ever felt about the case potentially being solved. When it comes to theories about Ingrid's murder, many have considered the possibility of fraud as a motive. At the time, real estate scams involving the sale of fictitious land were rampant in the area, and Ingrid was not only aware of them, but actively opposed to them. Some speculate that someone involved in these schemes might have wanted to silence her, fearing she would go to the police. However, this theory is less favored due to the sheer brutality of the crime. The 62 stab wounds suggest a level of violence that seems disproportionate for a business dispute, which would typically not escalate to such a personal and frenzied attack. Investigators have long believed that Ingrid's killer was someone she knew. The fact that nothing was stolen and there were no signs of sexual assault led them to rule out robbery or a sexually motivated crime early on. Instead, the evidence points to a personal connection between Ingrid and her killer. Someone who knew her would be more likely to have a motive rooted in their relationship, whether it was unresolved conflict, jealousy, or a deep-seated grudge. The intensity of the attack further supports this, suggesting a personal vendetta or an extreme emotional reaction. Additionally, the location of the murder adds weight to this theory. It's unlikely a stranger could have confronted Ingrid in the stairwell of her apartment building, a place where someone could walk in at any moment. This suggests the killer was familiar with her routine and possibly even her living situation. Some still believe the man who sent the Valentine's card is the real culprit. According to this theory, he hired a hitman to carry out the murder, while he himself boarded a ship to Canada to create an airtight alibi. However, investigators have largely dismissed the idea of a professional hitman being involved. A professional would likely have acted more efficiently, possibly using a firearm, and would not have inflicted such an excessive number of wounds. Additionally, leaving behind a trail of blood increases the risk of detection, something a professional would typically avoid. The 1989 incident, where Ingrid sustained a deep stab wound in her thigh, has also raised eyebrows. Her explanation, that she accidentally sat on a chef's knife, was met with skepticism. Some speculate this might have been an earlier, non-fatal attack, one that Ingrid downplayed or concealed for reasons unknown. Could it have involved the same person who later murdered her? The possibility lingers, adding another layer of intrigue to an already complex case. But the most prevalent theory, and the one investigators lean toward, is that Ingrid was killed by a stalker or a rejected admirer. The series of anonymous acts leading up to her murder strongly suggests she was being stalked. These include the Valentine's card, the love letter left in her car, the delivery of purple carnations, which she hated and associated with death, and the late-night doorbell ring at her boyfriend's apartment. And then there's the sheer brutality of the attack itself, a level of violence that often points to deeply personal motives. But here's a question that is more interesting. Could the killer have been a woman with a condition like Swyer syndrome or androgen insensitive syndrome, where a woman can have Y chromosomes in them? What do you think? Drop your theories and observations in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for extensive analysis of intriguing cases like this one.